Hi, everyone. Good morning. Um, we're going to give people a couple more minutes to hop on. So we'll be starting the webinar at 10 a.m. Or sorry, 10:02. Sorry, I was reading the time on my laptop. So everyone that's hopping on right now, we're going to be starting the presentation at 10:02. So giving people a couple minutes to join the webinar. All righty, it's 10:02. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. I hope everyone has had a good week so far. We'd like to welcome you all to our second brown bag training for the reporting year 2025 of the Electronic Annual Report. Today, we will be going over Section 8, which includes charges, income, and affordability. I did want to mention before we start, there was an email that was sent to all the registered attendees of this webinar that encouraged everyone who was be able to join to watch the tutorial videos that are posted on the eAR website. Hopefully, most of you found time to watch those videos and maybe brought some questions in that you have that you while you watched or as you were filling out the report currently. We do have a subject matter expert with us today who is going to be going over Section 8. She is going to be highlighting the main, or not main, she's going to be highlighting questions or parts of Section 8 that we get the most questions on or that people have the most difficulty in understanding what numbers need to be entered or what information needs to be in for those questions. And trying to think of anything else. Oh, if you guys haven't checked out on our eAR website, the video for last week's training is now posted online, and we hope to have this training recording posted by tomorrow or the beginning of next week. And I think that's all I have before we start. We can go ahead, Jonathan, if you could go to the next slide. All right, this is our eAR customer service team. And as I mentioned last week, we have our new customer service team member, Sydney Sally, with us. And we have Wendy Kilu, who is our logistics lead, myself, Gabriela Gutierrez, and Jonathan Schwady. Next slide. And as I mentioned, we have Rachel Skillman. She is the subject matter expert for the Section 8 for today's webinar, and she is with our sister unit, the Needs Analysis Unit. Next slide. You are going to be able to participate in this webinar. One way is by submitting a question using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and two is by raising your hand, and you'll be given an opportunity to provide a verbal comment. And we do ask that you wait for your name to be called on, and if you could limit your questions to 3 minutes per participant. Next slide. And discussion topics today is just a quick eAR assistance. The majority of the time we are going to be going over Section 8 since that is a hefty, it's three sections, so it's a hefty section. And then at the end, we'll be opening it up for questions and answers. Next slide. Okay, Jonathan.
All right, thank you, Gabby. So, hello, everybody. Welcome again. I'm going to go over the eAR assistance. So, what kind of assistance that you can get when trying to get help with the eAR. We have a couple options I'm about to go over and where to find them. First, being on the eAR portal homepage. When you're on the eAR portal homepage, there is a list of links that you can click on that will provide you with many different options, eAR user guidance document, FAQs. You can go ahead and explore that at your convenience for help. But if you need technical assistance for reporting to the Division of Drinking Water, there is there's a link that you can click there as well, and you can find out your eligibility for receiving funding support. And if you click that link, oops, oh man, I went too far. If you click that link, it will open up a form. So go ahead and put your information into that form and you click submit, and then you will get an answer about your eligibility if you and you can get help with filling out your eAR. So again, the application deadline is due March 1st, so that is coming up in a few days here. So if you need help, please submit this form and we will get back to you with an answer. We highly recommend you doing this if you are having troubles with your eAR filling it out. Another way to get assistance from the customer service team, there's two options here on the bottom of every single page on your eAR report. There is click here to get assistance with this section. If you click that link, it'll open up a form, the eAR customer service request form. And again, you fill out your information, you click submit, and we will get back to you within promptly or as soon as we can with information, or we're trying to help you with with your issue that you are having. Um, another method to get assistance is back on that eAR portal homepage. Above those links, if you click the help, there is a contact us. You click that contact us, and again, that will open up that same customer service request form. And again, fill it out, hit submit, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. And lastly, you can always email us at ddw-ear@waterboards.ca.gov. If you forget these exist, and you still need help, go ahead and email us. We would prefer if you use the form. It helps us get more information and get ahead of this a little bit and give you a better customer service experience. All right, that's going to be it for me. Go ahead, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Today I will be giving a little overview of how to complete one of the more difficult sections, or I would say, of the electronic annual report. And we know a lot of folks struggle with the rate table. So I'm going to provide a little overview of how to complete the rate table. You can go to the next slide, please. So why do we need this information? Senate Bill 200 requires water systems to report information on their technical, managerial, and financial capacity. And so this is specifically collecting data on financial capacity of water systems. Next slide, please. So the kind of most important choice that can really affect, whether you see something that is kind of confusing or not. Anyway, this is the sort of first step in the process, and that is selecting the rate structure that is most applicable to how customers are billed. And they have a lot of long, kind of confusing names, so I'll go through each one in more detail. Go to the next slide, please. I think, yes. And there is more, I'll show more information, but there are help tips within the survey that you can access at any time that will provide you with more information. Another very important part of this to make sure that you're going to get the right answer out of it is to make sure that you select the correct metric or unit of measure that is used in customer billing specific to your water system. And so we'll see in a little bit. I know that there's sometimes confusion because the number that we are trying to arrive at is in 100 cubic feet. So later on, when we have questions about kind of confusing, like we do not bill in 100 cubic feet, and we totally understand that. And actually, the point of kind of all of these different pieces of information that we're asking you to provide is so that we can get a standard rate. So we know that, because water systems are billing in lots of different ways, we need a way to standardize that and find kind of the set amount that is being billed for a set amount of water, which in this case is 600 cubic feet of water is what we're trying to estimate. So make sure that you pick this one. Obviously, we do get a lot of kind of confusion or discrepancy between gallons and 1,000 gallons. So please make sure that you're being careful when you select those. Next slide, please. So we'll start with an example that's the most straightforward, and this is also a very common rate structure, so it may apply to you. But this is a single or flat rate, which is often unmetered. And so this is where customers are billed a set amount for drinking water services every single month, regardless of how much they use. And so I've provided the example here of perhaps, $45.10 a month per drinking water and an additional $10 a month charge included in the bill. So, but we can see here that rate is not varying at all depending on the amount of water that is being used by the customer. So this is a very straightforward one. Maybe it applies to you. And then we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So an also very common structure is actually, I think there's one before. I think there maybe is. Yeah, thank you. So base rate fixed and usage rate variable. And I know it's such a mouthful to have to say this every time. So a fixed base rate and a variable usage rate. And what that just means is that the base rate is non-volumetric. So the base rate is not varying depending on the amount of water used, but the usage rate is varying based on the amount. Actually, I'm so sorry. There's one more before this one. Yeah, thank you. That one, yeah. So the base rate, the fixed base rate, and the uniform usage rate. So this is kind of our things are the rate is changing depending on not depending on the amount of water used. So there's a fixed base rate for water service, and then there's a uniform usage rate, meaning that customers are billed a specific rate per unit of measure. So it doesn't change as we kind of, it's just flat. And so in this case, you would just take, if let's say that a customer used 1,000, 100 HCF, let's just say they use 6 HCF. So we would take the base rate and then we would add the uniform usage rate times the amount of water used. And I'll show you more examples as we go through that will be hopefully more helpful than me just saying numbers out loud. Next slide, please. And we can, whenever you have a second. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah. And so this one I kind of started to discuss. So this is a base rate is not varying. It's a fixed base rate that is not varying depending on the amount of water used, but the usage rate is changing in this case. So the variable a variable usage rate means typically that the usage rate increases as more water is used. And so this is where we kind of get into what we'll talk about later as being called levels or tiers. And so you can think of, a customer each month falling into a specific level or tier based on the amount of water that they used in that or in that billing cycle, whatever the sort of billing period is. And so I've provided the example here that there's a fixed base rate of $10 that is just being charged no matter what, regardless of if any water is used or not. Um, and then the usage rate is going to increase as more and more water is used by that customer. So if you're using less than 400 cubic feet of water, you would be billed $10 plus $5 per every 100 cubic foot used. And then going up to the next tier, 5 to 1,200 cubic feet of water used. So let's say you go over, you're now using 600 cubic feet of water. That is now you're in that second tier, and that is billed at 550 per 100 cubic feet. So you're being charged the $10 fixed base rate plus 550 times whatever amount of 100 cubic feet of water is being used within that tier. And then same, 13 to 1,800 cubic feet of water is going to be our third tier, and that's billed at $8 per 100 cubic foot. And then every 100 cubic foot after anything above 18 is billed at $11 per 100 cubic foot. And so you would want to, in that case, right, let's say you're using 2,000 cubic feet, we would have $10 plus eight, or sorry, plus $11 times 20 100 cubic feet. So again, I know it's kind of probably not the most easy to follow what I'm saying. So we'll see in a minute how these are going to look in the rate table. But this is just to help you kind of think about which of these rate structures is most applicable for your water system. Next slide, please. Another rate structure is a variable base rate and a uniform usage rate. So in that case, the base rate would change per usage amount. So depending on what tier you fall in, you can always think of those tiers and levels as kind of just categories of amount of water used. And then the usage rate is going to be constant. So it is not going to change. So we'll have different base rates, but then the amount that you're being charged per unit is going to always be the same. And I've put an example here of a base rate that it'd be $6 up to 400 gallons, and then 400 to 1,000 gallons each. There's a $10 flat base rate that is applied, and then more than 1,000 gallons, a $20 flat base rate is applied. And maybe that's just proportional type cost of service. But whatever that may be for you, and then there's a uniform usage rate of $1 per gallon. And so in this case, you would find the tier that the customer is in based on the amount of water that they're using. If you just wanted to calculate the bill for an individual customer, for example, you would find their tier, and then you would apply the base rate and then multiply their number of gallons used by $1. I wanted to put an important caveat in here that we realize that base rates for many systems may change, not based on a usage amount. So perhaps elevation, meter size, location, these customers are charged at different base rates. For the purposes of this survey, base rates that vary due to anything other than like the amount of water used should be considered as having a fixed base rate. So let's say that you charge customers above 1,000 meters, one particular base rate, and customers below 1,000 meters, another base rate. In this case, it's because it's a little difficult for us to standardize that information across water systems. So in that case, you should pick the most common of those two. So if you have more customers that live above 1,000 meters in elevation, then you would pick that one and consider that to be a flat base rate. And if you have more customers that are living below 1,000 meters elevation, then you would pick that and use that. And so you'll see that language throughout the help tips if there's kind of a concern about which to pick, picking the most common or the one that best represents the majority of the customer base is most appropriate. Next slide, please. And finally, we have kind of the most complicated, which is just a combination of a variable base rate and a variable usage rate. And so both the base rate and the usage rate are going to be different depending on the amount of water being used. And again, typically that increases in as more water is being used. And so I won't say all of these numbers, but you can see here I've provided an example where 0 to 400 gallons is charged $6 per gallon, and then each gallon is 50 cents. And that kind of goes up until our third tier, which is anything over 1,000 gallons is charged a base rate of 20, and each gallon is then billed at $1.50 per gallon. And same thing here, if the base rate is varying due to anything other than the amount of water consumed, then you should treat it as a fixed base rate and select the most common. Next slide, please. And since this is obviously a big mouthful and a lot to keep track of, I would highly recommend checking out the help tips that are provided in the survey and the little, red circle help buttons. And they provide a lot of information about what these different rate structures are and how you should think about how your customers are being billed. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take a couple examples of what, your billing structure might look like and kind of try and translate it into selecting a specific rate structure and then filling this table out. And so let's say that, and actually this came from a real example and it was important to highlight. So there's an $88 base rate up until 1,200 cubic feet. And then everything after 12, so 12 to 2,200 cubic feet is billed at $9 per 100 cubic foot. 22 to 3,200 cubic feet is billed $13 per unit per 100 cubic foot. And then any usage above 3,200 cubic feet is billed at $17 per 100 cubic foot. So maybe you're looking at this and it might be a little puzzling because it doesn't seem to really fit into the categories that I kind of mentioned earlier, or we might have a little trouble kind of figuring it out. But in this case, the base rate is actually fixed and the usage rate is variable. And so and what that means is, and we'll go to the next one. Did I put, yes. Okay, so you can go to the next slide, please. So I've tried to provide an example of how we would fill out the table in this case. And the reason that this is a little tricky is actually because, next slide, please, is actually because of this first tier. And so it's not written down in this way, but what you're actually seeing is there's an $88 base rate. So they're being charged $88 no matter what, as long as they're using less than 1,200 cubic feet of water. But there's actually a $0 per unit variable base rate because within that first tier, they're not being charged anything additional per unit used. But what that really means is that they're being charged a $0 variable usage rate. And the reason that the structure works out like this is because then as we go up in tiers, as more water is being used, they are being charged some amount for each unit of water consumed. And so if you were to select, the fixed base rate and variable usage rate structure, you would see a table that looks like this. You would also need to select how many levels or tiers that customers are being charged at. And something important to remember when selecting the number of levels and tiers is that this last tier, there's always a last tier if you charge customers at any specific, different levels. There's always a final tier that's the last thing up to like infinity amount of water used. And so this is why you'll see the table looking like this, and I'll explain a little bit more as we go through. But to start with, let's just do this first tier. So it's an $88 base rate. And so we want to go ahead and put the base rate in the base rate. That one's pretty straightforward. But then the other two columns are a little more confusing. So what we want to put in the second column is the top measure, the top of the range that amount, that tier applies to. So in this case, it's anything below 1,200 cubic feet. And so 12 is going to be our maximum volume of water per tier. So I know that the language isn't the most straightforward in this case, but what that second column is really trying to get at is tell me the maximum amount of water that this tier applies to. And then as we discussed, or as I mentioned, like it's not explicit, but what this really means is that a $0 usage rate is being charged per unit of measure within this first tier. And I've put kind of I've written everything out so that you can see the $80 base rate plus $0 per HCF up to 12 HCF. Next slide, please. And so then we're going to move on to our second tier, which is a little bit more straightforward, perhaps, because we don't have to think about this zero. So it's important also to remember here that the base rate is still being charged. So again, this came from an actual rate structure that a customer submitted to ask for help on. And so sorry. And so we're going to carry that 88 base rate throughout. And so the boxes have been grayed out, and I'll show you in just a minute, but that's because you have selected a fixed base rate. The base rate is not going to change in our different tiers, and so you don't need to continue to fill out 88 every single time. But I mean, in theory, you could imagine that every entry in that first base rate column says 88, but we don't want you to have to enter it a bunch of times when it's going to be constant throughout. And within this second tier, which is between 12 and 2,200 cubic feet, customers are being charged $9 per 100 cubic feet. So we're going to put that top metric 22 in the second column, and then $9 per HCF is going to go in the third column. Next slide, please. And same here, the base rate does not need to be re-entered, and anything between 2,200 cubic feet and that new top metric of 32 is being charged 1,300 cubic feet of, $13 per 100 cubic feet. Next slide, please. And finally, this one is also a little tricky, but you can see that the box is not available for this maximum volume of water per tier. And this is reflecting what I mentioned, where whatever that last tier is going to be anything from, in this case, 3,200 cubic feet to infinity. And so that top measure, the maximum volume of water in this last tier should always basically be infinity. There's no maximum. And so that is why nothing needs to be entered in that second column. And so here you only need to put the $17 per 100 cubic foot variable usage rate in that final cell in the third column. And again, yeah, the $88 plus $17 per 100 cubic foot. Next slide, please. And another example, so we'll get a little more complicated. We're going to think of this rate structure, which is, we'll just reveal it's a variable base rate and a variable usage rate. So you can see that the base rate is changing depending on the amount of water used, and so is the usage rate. Next slide, please. And so I've kind of gone ahead and filled out what the table would look like. But I also want to make a note that this is a case that we see a fair amount where a customer will have selected maybe gallons or 1,000 gallons. And if it's 1,000 gallons is the unit of measure, then you would only need to write like one, because that's 1,000 gallons. So just I can answer more questions if people are not sure, but excuse me. But just be careful with the unit of measure, because that does make a difference, obviously. And so here the reporter has selected gallons. And so we want to go ahead and say 1,000 gallons, 2,000 gallons, 3,000 gallons. And we can see that, like just for example, that first tier, there's a $10 base rate. So that's going to now go, because we have a variable base rate. That's why this new column has appeared, that now second column. And so that's going to allow, if for some reason the tier structures were different, you could enter that, but in this case, they're all the same. So we have everything from 0 to 1,000 gallons is being billed in a specific way, everything between 1,000 and 2,000, and then 3,000 to 4,000, and everything above 4,000. Next slide, please. And then, sorry, give me one second. And then I've actually tried to highlight, sorry, apologies. I've highlighted another structure here just so that you can kind of see within how it can break down a little bit more. And you may have within that $10 base rate up to 2,000 gallons, there could actually be two different levels of variable usage rate. And so there you can see that on these first two rows, they're being charged that $10 base rate up to 2,000 gallons, but you can see that there is actually a different usage rate within the 0 to 1,000 gallon tier, which a customer is being charged 5 cents per gallon, versus 1,000 to 2,000, where they're being charged 10 cents per gallon. But they're still in this world of their sort of first tier of the base rate. So we're just going to double that. And I'm happy to talk more about that. I know it maybe isn't the most clear as I'm saying it. Next slide, please. And this is just highlighting that here the $10 base rate up to 2,000 gallons is going to be put into this table twice, since it is applying to two different usage rates. So you want to select, the number of levels or tiers that corresponds to like the maximum amount of differentiation you may have in customer billing. Next slide, please. And then just working through all of this so you can see what I was saying in a bit more clear with illustration. So we have duplicated this $10 base rate, but then we can see that we have a different usage rate tiers within that single base rate tier. Next slide, please. And same here. So we can see we're still in that tier, but we're now being charged 10 cents per gallon between 1,000 and 2,000 gallons used. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to also highlight where, depending on, so in the most straightforward case where you have like residential customers that are not broken up into single family and multifamily, we've actually we've gone through and we've made it so that you cannot fill out cells in the table that are not required or would be providing information that's not necessary. Like when I highlighted earlier, you don't need to put the base rate each time because we understand that there's that the base rate is not changing throughout those tiers. So we only ask you to enter it once. And then similarly for that, as I mentioned, that last tier where the top volume of water used is infinity and it doesn't need to be entered because it doesn't, there's not really a top measure. But some tables have not, some of the less common rate structures, the tables are not edited in or have not been kind of selectively grayed out in that way. So you'll still see these boxes that you maybe don't need to enter. And so definitely let us know if this is something that you're seeing and confused about. But I've just tried to highlight that since we're here in this maximum volume of water per tier, like I said, there should kind of never be anything in the final tier's maximum volume of water because it's kind of always infinity. So everything that's happening in this tier is just anything above 200 units of water used. And same here, everything that's happening in tier 2 is and tier 2 of the multifamily is anything above 100 units used. Next slide, please. And and just to make it very specific, you could pretend that it looked like this. And I know that's a bit confusing, but you do not need to fill those cells out. Next slide, please. And just to make everything more explicit and help you better follow along here, I've explicitly said there's no need to re-enter a fixed base rate because uh yeah. Next slide, please. And then here there's no need to enter that top metric because the last tier, as long as there's no cap on consumption, which I suppose may be the case, but as long as it's the last tier to infinity gallons, nothing needs to be entered there. And next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight a different case like that base rate that we talked about because the base rate is constant in this particular, fixed in this particular rate structure example. I've also wanted to highlight for the non-residential rate structure, those tables, the cells will definitely still appear that you don't need to fill out. And next slide, please. So you can see here we have our commercial, but that the commercial class of customers only has one tier, but the institutional customers have 3 tiers, and you do not need to re-enter that fixed base rate 3 times for tier 2 and tier 3 in that far left column. Next slide, please. And yeah, no need to re-enter the fixed base rate here when there are multiple tiers. Next slide, please. And apologies, I'll fix these slides. They got a little cut off, but also just being very explicit that there's no need to enter the top metric / unit of measure for the last tier when a variable usage rate is being used. Next slide, please. Honestly, just more examples for you to kind of see that because in this particular case, we have a fixed base rate and a uniform usage rate for both commercial, and there's only one tier. So there's no top metric. If there's only one tier, the box will still appear anyway, but if you only are charging customers kind of a set, they're being charged $100 plus $2 per unit. That's not, there is only one tier and there's technically no, top measure. It's just 0 to infinity gallons. So there's no need to enter into anything in those boxes. Next slide, please. And I'll go, actually, just next one too, please. And I've been, again, just want to be explicit so you can use these slides as a resource when there's no top metric or unit of measure that's needed for that single tier in the commercial class of customers. Next slide, please. And but so the commercial customers in this case have a uniform usage rate, but the landscape irrigation customers, so I misspoke a little bit. There's not even a selection of tiers. So if you were to select a fixed base rate and a uniform usage rate, you would not be asked to tell us how many levels or tiers there are because we are assuming there are no different levels or tiers. There's one rate. So you can kind of see, but with landscape irrigation, the base rate is fixed, but the usage rate is variable. So you would need to specify the number of tiers and then nothing would need to be entered in that final box of the top usage rate. Next slide, please. And all of this is, what is this doing? This is all leading to it's actually, you'll see it in the next section. So this is all in section A, and that you will fill out your rate table, and then there will be some auto calculations that occur and lead you to what you will see in section B, in section B 1.9, where we've used the information that you have given us to auto calculate a comparable cost per 600 cubic feet of water so that we can kind of compare across systems. And just as in case you're curious, 600 cubic feet of water is about 4,488 gallons, but that is roughly equivalent to 50 gallons per person per day of a 3-person household for a month, which is in line with the statewide conservation goals of 55 gallons per capita daily. And so that is where that number comes from and why we're trying to use that as a standard for comparison. Next slide, please. Another way, so actually, can you go back one? I apologize. So I did just want to highlight, I mean, oftentimes for a variety of reasons, you may see a number that has been auto-calculated that does not look right. It does not apply, and maybe you can't figure out, or maybe there's a situation that sort of isn't included in the rate structure table. And if you need to, you can check the provide alternative amount box. It is a little tricky because it might be difficult for you to kind of come up with the 6 HCF number, 600 cubic feet of water amount. But anyway, we kind of look at these and we understand that it's not always coming out correctly. And so you can see in this particular situation, maybe somebody has written auto calculation is incorrect, and then they provide us with other information in this other section. Next slide, please. And one way, one thing that so for example, if someone reached out to me for help with gallons, and so the calculation ends up being 10 plus $10 for the base rate plus $2 as the variable usage rate times 4.5 units used. And then we come up with a $19 per 600 cubic feet of water. Next slide, please. And you can see actually that the auto calculation table in section B 1.9 is going to round that $19 to $20 per HCF. So you may see a slight discrepancy, but if it's not major, then it's nothing to worry about. And finally, next slide, please. What are we doing with all of this stuff? As I said, it's being used to kind of do needs assessment work. It's used in the risk assessment per Senate Bill 200, and then the data, it's outdated and we are working to update it, but it is also shown on the Safer dashboard. The Safer dashboard is not outdated, but the water system financial capacity and affordability dashboard is in the process of being revitalized. So that's kind of where comparable information is located. And yeah, that's all I have. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions. I know it's quite difficult to kind of see all the moving pieces, so I'm happy to speak more about anything.
Thank you, Rachel. Next slide, Sydney. I think it's Wendy now. Wendy.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, it took me a minute to find the screen. Yeah, so we want to thank Rachel for giving us the great information about Section 8 and our team reviewing the eAR information for assistance. Just also want to let you guys know some upcoming dates to remember and keep in mind. If you are seeking technical assistance through a third-party provider, applications are due March 1st. And next Thursday at 10 o'clock, we'll be providing our third brown bag training, and that will be on sections 9 through all the way to the end, like the finalized section. And if you have not registered for that, you can find our registration links on our eAR website. And then thirdly, the reminder date for the eAR submissions are due April 1st. So I'm going to go ahead and next slide, open it up for questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask your question via the phone.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, Rachel, looks like we've got 3 questions that have come in. The first one is from James Woody. James is asking, a mutual water company charges an assessment based on property size, shares, whether they receive water or not. This is not a tax, as a mutual water company cannot impose a tax. It is billed completely separate from any water bill. Where is this entered in Section 8?
That is a great question, and I do want to look into it more and get back to you, but my first sense would be that if it is not,
And if Rachel, if you want them to expand a little bit more, we can ask them to raise their hand and we can give them the opportunity to.
yeah. Yeah, James, if you would like to provide any more information, I mean, I think it would be, I think it would be up for debate whether you think of it as part of a base rate, like as a fixed base rate, potentially. Um, but it would maybe, yeah, be variable. So that might fall into the category of, I would need to, and maybe we can talk more about it, but it would maybe fall into that category of a base rate that's varying based on something other than usage amount, if it's varying based on property size. And so in that case, you would maybe want to select the most common one, but I realize it's not super straightforward because it's not really kind of billed in the same way that other water bills the rest of the water is billed. Um,
He has his hand up,
yeah,
so if
please.
we want to unmute him.
Woody, you can unmute
There we
yourself.
go. Okay.
Mm.
Yep.
I'm
Hi,
unmuted.
James. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, I've had three different places. One was County Water District, which did something similar, and two different mutual water companies,
Mm-hmm.
one of which only charges the assessment on properties which do not have a meter or get water.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
completely independent of any water.
Mm-hmm.
The other two, one of them charges just based on property size, everybody, whether you get water or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the County Water District used to charge everybody, whether you got water or not, except they charged more for people that got water, and properties that didn't weren't on a main, they got charged less.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it really doesn't
Mm.
have anything to do with water usage.
Yeah, I think in that case, I want to think about it more and I can get back to you. I think it would not be entered as part of the section, because there are parts in section 8B where it kind of talks about um, other sources, but hmm.
Yeah, my question was if it went B1 somewhere, I'm not sure where, or if you entered it as a kind of a weird thing in section 8A1.15.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting. Because the A1 point, that's where I was kind of thinking that maybe it would be an A1.15. Um, but then it's also not really a selection that you can make in A1.15, I believe. I'm gonna be honest, it does get really dicey with that because we know that like a lot of water systems are actually not charging these variable like base rates based on water usage. It's typically based on other factors. And it sounds like this is one of those cases where kind of depending on the type of customer you are or how large the size of the lot is, those are what is kind of being determining what kind of what base rate you're in. Um, Yeah, would it be okay if we followed up offline? Because I just want to make sure that I'm kind of thinking through the different cases and giving you the correct information.
Certainly.
Great, thank you.
James, if you could email us, or if you don't mind, you could privately put in the Q&A your email, and we can save that, or you can email us, and I can put the thing, or if you could email us sorry, I just saw the email is there on the screen. You could email us there, and so we can communicate with you however you would like, but just so we don't lose communication with you. So we make sure your question is answered.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, James.
Second question is from Lisa Johnson. None of the public water systems we prepare the eAR for charge their tenants for water. Does it continue to be only income and expenditures only as it has been in the past?
Yes, and so that's a great point. I probably should have led with this, that all of the things that I just said really only apply to water systems that charge customers for water. And so at the very beginning of section 8A, you'll get that sort of first one that says, do you charge your customers, yes or no? And if you do not charge your customers, then you don't see like 90% of the other things that those systems that do charge customers would see an AA, and you'll mostly be entering information about income and expenditures in section 8B. So yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you. Um, Question from Tom Gibbons. I have a variable usage rate that increased in either July or August. How should we go about reporting this?
That is a really good question as well. I think I will, what I would say off the bat is if you are billing, if your fiscal, if the calendar year is your fiscal year and you kind of are reporting information on the eAR for that year, I guess I would use the variable usage rate that was in place for more of the year, so perhaps before the increase. There's also a part of that section where you can mention that your rate structures have changed. And so you could make a little note in there about why that happened, if you felt like that would be good information. That
And
would
then
be, yeah, go ahead.
they can also they can also upload both
Yes.
the documents. Tom, you can also upload those documents into I believe it's section 8A. I can't remember the exact question, but you could upload those documents, but also for sure there is a question in there is have your rates increase, or if there's been a change in your rates. And you can select yes or no, and then it follows up with a couple more other questions as to why the rates have changed.
And I
And
think, yeah, in general, the most common, like the one, which it's hard to say, but I would say, yeah, the one that you had for most of the year. Like, I mean, I think if the rate structure were to change in like October or November or something, I would definitely say use the one that you have been using for the majority of the year. That would be my first instinct, but I think just providing more information in that, and providing your rate structure table would be helpful.
it is 11 a.m. I think we have like three more questions.
Yes.
But we can answer these questions here on the webinar. And then if you guys have any, we'll just answer these three, maybe answer one more if another one comes in beforehand. But if anyone else has any other questions regarding today's, the section, we went over section 8, feel free to email us at that email that's shown on the screen, and we will forward your question to Rachel, or if Rachel needs to also discuss that with her unit, that can also be done. But okay. Well,
Before you answer the questions, can you go to the next slide?
oh, oh, Sydney. Thank you, Sydney.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
just want to let everyone know that there's a brown bag again next Thursday at 10 to 11.
Okay, the next question is, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Mulaney. If a base fee is charged annually, I assume we should divide that by 12 and add up to the monthly charge. And I can answer. There is a question, right, Rachel, on there
Yeah.
that asks I don't know word for word, but it asks if you charge annually, monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly.
Yeah. Or some other amount of time. You can specify the number of days between billing cycles if none of those apply. But yeah. And yeah, that's a great I probably should have mentioned that too. Like when I was like, here's your rate structures, here's your unit of measure. The other question that is quite important that you'll be asked is how frequently customers are billed. And actually, then you do not need to do the calculation yourself. If you select annual, the auto calculation will divide that base rate for you by 12. And similarly in other cases. So yeah, thank you. That's a great question.
Cool. Second to last question is from David. For the eAR, if there's no master water meter installed, what figure should you enter into the eAR database?
David, I may ask you to either follow up with me or clarify, but my instinct would be if the customers are not being metered, then most likely it would be some sort of single or flat base rate. And depending on which, I mean, if there are sort of different ones for different types of customers, you could select the most common, but that is usually the case when connections are unmetered, is that there's some sort of flat or fixed rate that is or fee that's charged per the billing cycle. So maybe in your specific case, yeah, let me know if that wasn't as helpful or I could go into more detail.
I'll go on to the next question. Maybe David will raise his hand if he needs more. Last question is from Daniel. Is the revenue from wastewater consider revenue for water?
That's also a great question. And in general, no. We are trying here to mostly get out the drinking water specific charges. We do realize that there are water systems where the charges are very intertwined and it's kind of difficult to separate out wastewater. But in general, revenue we would most like to have the revenue that only is being used to that is coming in from drinking water operations and then being used to support drinking water operations within reason. So and if they are not, okay, yeah, sorry. So that's my wastewater answer. I see that David has followed up that they're not charging anyone for water. So in that case, then you would select at the beginning in the very first question, you would select no, not charging customers for water, and then many questions in this section would not apply. And you would mostly be entering things in section 8B for income and revenue.
Oh, all righty, folks. Again, if you guys have any more questions, I know we got timed out, but there's a lot of information to cover with Section 8. If you guys have any other questions, please feel free to email our customer service team and we'll be sure to forward off your question to Rachel. Thank you for joining. And like Wendy said, we'll see you all next week for our last brown bag training, which is going to cover sections 9 through finalize. Thank you, everyone. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Bye.